Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Line, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison.
My name is Brandon Bonner.
And we'll be your host. All right, thanks for joining us. We are in episode 9, and the topic for today is we're talking about how silent is too silent. Here, the world that we're living in is, and Brandon and I, we've been talking about this. We were actually talking about it last night on the phone and just really struggling with this idea of, in today's culture, in today's world, with social media and all the things that are out there, we as Christians have to be careful about how we say things, the tone that we use, what we're putting out there, how we're using social media. And so as he and I have been dialoguing about this back and forth, it's kind of like, this is it's harder than what you would think as far as deciding how we as Christians need to be handling talking to people about what it means to be a Christian. And so obviously, there's lifestyles. We've done a whole series of that in the past. I would encourage you to go back and listen to that, of different lifestyles that are out there, building relationships with people that are on the the fringes, and leading different lifestyles that are not part of the Christian worldview, and ultimately wanting to bring everybody to Christ. So it's this place that we find ourselves in, where if we put something out on media, so you're talking about larger swaths of the population, or even talking to large groups of people, how you say things to them, or how what you say. We obviously are living in a place where if you're not careful, you can get canceled, and you can get fired. We've seen people getting fired for things that they post on media. So we're gonna tackle this subject, and hopefully it will be something that you'll find useful. We've got 6 talking points here, and we've got some prompts. And I think what we're going to do, Brandon, is just go back and forth, read the prompt, and then discuss this a little bit more and dig into some detail on it. So this first prompt, silence versus shouting. Why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Sure. So many Christians feel trapped between two extremes. So say nothing to avoid offending folks, or say everything loudly to defend the truth. And I don't think we see Scripture framing it that way. We've talked a lot about Jesus. He was full of grace and truth, John 1:14, but he was not silent, right? He was acting courageously in public. He was, but when he was dealing with individuals on an individual level, he was tender. And so I think a lot of us are maybe asking the wrong question, and instead of should we speak, maybe the better question is how, when, and why do we speak?
Yeah. Do you want to start on that, or do you want me to respond?
Yeah, so I think this is definitely something we've talked a lot about, and I think we've been very intentional on previous episodes on, this is something that we have a real opportunity as Christians to modify how, when, and why we speak to be most effective. And I know we've gone back and forth a lot, and I think that we've talked a lot about Christians. Are we too silent? And I think that maybe is something I haven't thought of until we talked about it last night, of maybe we're not speaking at all, and we've kind of reverted back to this hey, I'm just not to offend you, I want you to feel at peace and not bother you do your own thing, and I'm not going to say anything about it, and maybe that's not the best approach. What are your thoughts?
I've swung. I've been on this extreme, and I was putting everything out on my political views, and just having this feeling of, I'm doing the right thing. This is righteous. I even used the argument. I'm like, if the Apostle Paul were here today, he would be using every avenue he could to get the word out. But it's how you get the word out. And we also need to keep in mind that they didn't have social media back then. And so we lose a lot of our intent. We lose the tone. You mentioned, body language is a large part of it. And so we're set up for failure on social media. My heart, and when I write something, the spirit in which I'm writing it is, I would like to say, honestly, it's coming from a place of genuine love and concern. But as you mentioned, as the reader who may not know me, it could come across as extremely harsh, The tone could be misinterpreted, and that is risky because it sets up a situation where that person may be turned off completely, and then we lose that opportunity altogether. Well, now I've gone from that swinging all the way to the other side where I really don't post anything
Mm-hmm.
on social media unless it's a Bible summary or something very innocuous, and I don't get into any of that stuff anymore. And not that I don't have things to say about it or have opinions, I do, but I don't think it's as impactful or as effective as what I would like it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I struggle with that too, and it's the example that I used with you. As we were talking through this the other night. If and I've used this in a sermon too. Penn and Jillette. He's an atheist. The Las Vegas guys. This act, and he had a guy that came up and proselytized after his show, handed him a Bible, and I think it was Gillette. Is he the one that talks? Is Penn the one that's quiet? I think it's Gillette. Anyway, he said basically that he really thought that was a good thing because he says, if you're a Christian and you truly believe everything that's in this Bible, how bad would you have to hate another person knowing where they're going to go when they die? Because you believe that, right? How bad would you have to hate humanity to not tell them about this stuff? And I think that's a great point. And so I was talking about with you the other night. It's like if we know how this story ends, and we know that each soul is going to spend eternity somewhere, it's like, well, we don't want to offend you, so we're going to keep quiet about it. We don't want to push that out there in any way. So it'd be like me knowing that there's this bus coming, and I see that you're about to step out in front of it, and I don't do anything to warn you that you're about to get crushed by a bus. And so that's where we find ourselves right now in this weird, awkward space of not wanting to be silent, but also knowing that there's a lot of places where this can derail pretty quickly if we put stuff out there.
Yeah, and I think a lot focusing on social media for a second, because I feel like that's really the public form that most of us use and are aware of. Like if you're going to spread a mass message, that's the most effective medium at the moment. And so I really wonder, like, what is the type of content that we're putting out there on social media? I think about those Super Bowl commercials about Jesus. Yeah. Like it's doesn't say a lot, right? But it's a very like positive and encouraging message that maybe provokes people to think of like, okay, so this is who Jesus was. And so maybe that's our approach. Like, I think we feel like we have to evangelize on social media by taking hard stances against moral or ethical issues, where my viewpoint is, can we put stuff out there that shows people this is who Jesus was? Very counterculture in terms of like social media is very divisive. The country's very divided. There's, political parties, and we keep finding ways to separate. But from a scriptural standpoint, there's multiple beautiful narratives about reconciliation, bringing people back together, unity. And so that's, we put those messages out there. That's an opportunity for us, I think to stand out, because the typical perception of Christians is, you're hypocrites and you're judgmental and bigots and et cetera, et cetera. And we know from Scripture that that's not the case. That's not what we're supposed to be anyhow, and that's not how Jesus was. So in our actions, in our workplaces, in our schools, in our churches, in our communities, and on social media, can we educate people this is what Jesus looked like? And with the moral issues, not stepping away from those, but can we handle those on an individual level?
Yeah, and that's where this line gets really fuzzy for me. This is because as right before the show started, I was talking about, when Jesus, because I looked at him as the example, and he had these massive crowds, so he's not talking individually, and the stuff he said was really hard for them to hear. As a matter of fact, it offended a lot of people, and they walked away. And so you see him dealing with that, but then when you see him dealing with people one-on-one, like this prompt said here, is he was very tender, he was relational, he phrased his questions in a relational standpoint. So you see these two different aspects. And so when I look at that public setting, he wasn't afraid to talk about things that might have offended people. And how does that relate then to social media? It's you know it's this really ambiguous line that we're in today, because obviously I've already said social media is different. We're not dealing with you know being able to have this relational setting where people see you. I do from the pulpit, when I preach, people can read my body language and that kind of stuff. But for him, he knew that people were going to be offended, but he said the stuff that he said anyway. So do we learn from that? Do we take away that as an example and go, maybe I shouldn't be as concerned if I know that what I'm saying is ultimately going to be a truth that could potentially get somebody to wake up and be saved, or turn to Christ, or change their moral codes.
Yeah. Well, and I think that Jesus' ministry, he was through his actions and what he was doing, people were marveled. I mean, he was healing people, and so he didn't just start his missionary journey after fasting for 40 days and be like, all right, everyone, you're sinning, and this is not the way to do it. Like, I think that there's a buildup, right? I mean,
right.
Except for the religious leaders. I mean, he was pretty hard stance on them from pretty early on, but they were challenging him consistently. Right. So, I think that maybe we miss part of it. So I think we jump right to, well, Jesus. He was counterculture. He, flipped the tables in the temple. I mean, he was offending people, and he was, but also he was establishing himself, sharing love, and his approach to things was very different. And he also met people where they were, and I don't want to jump down because I know this is a prompt we're going to get into, but he met people where they were. He was actively engaging and interacting with the broken and the people that needed him and were lost and the low of society. And so I think that's something that we miss because we're jumping out there making comments on social media, and that's maybe even that broken community that we're trying to reach is like, well, I'm not talking to that guy. Yeah. He's a hypocrite or a bigot or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's interesting too that you said that he, a lot of the rebuke that he had was to the religious leaders of the day. And you had mentioned before the show, would he be addressing the religious leaders of today, or would he be addressing where we're at from a cultural standpoint in our decline in moral, ethical things? And I don't know. I think definitely he would address the religious leaders, the different churches, the stuff that churches are getting into. We've talked about already, the politicizing and how churches and political stuff have become more and more integrated. And I think that he would address that, because you're talking about some moral issues, that like abortion is it's a huge moral issue. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of folks that have capitulated to that from the Christian standpoint. We could go on and pick, your hot topic, right, low-hanging fruit. But I do believe that he would find a way to address that in a way that is perfect.
Right.
So I struggle with it still, because I don't know if I'm being too silent, if I should speak up more and take more of a public stance on certain issues. I just, I'm going to continue to pray about that. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to hit this next prompt, because we've talked about those first two really already in just this long discussion on the first one. Relationship before rebuke. Paul gives a helpful framework in 1 Corinthians 5 where he says, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? So just basically what I was just saying there. So inside the church, we have examples of clear correction. We have examples of accountability and moral standards. But outside the church, the focus there is on evangelism, invitation, patience. Relationship often precedes moral confrontation. And I think that's a huge thing. So not because sin doesn't matter, but because conviction is the Spirit's role. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in past episodes, but I feel that Christians oftentimes feel like they have to force conviction, like they own that. You're doing this wrong, so I need to force conviction on you so you can see that this is wrong. which that's not
Yeah.
that's not our role whatsoever. And it does not encourage conviction. It's not an effective tool. But having relationships, being inclusive, inviting folks in, evangelizing, sharing who Jesus was and why he came and the gifts that he gave us, so that we can have the most incredible gift that we'll ever receive. I mean, just focusing on, hey, this is an amazing thing that I personally I want you to be a part of as a human being. I love you and care about you, and regardless of where you're at in your life, I want you to experience this. Like, I want you to be in heaven one day and meet your Creator. That approach is our responsibility.
Yeah, and this reminds me, this particular section here, this reminds me of the parable of the sower, where our job is to sow. We scatter the seeds, and some of those seeds are going to land on good, fertile soil, and we're going to have a response. But a lot of those seeds aren't going to land on that. A lot of those seeds are going to fall on rocky soil, on soil that is not good for growth. It is what it is. And so, as an analogy there, the world is the different things where the seeds get sown, the different ground that you have. And I think that a lot of this struggle that I have hinges on this, what you just pointed out. It's like I feel compelled to go and, convict and be like, but don't you understand? Don't you get it? Come on, surely you can see that. And that's probably, it's not my place to do that. It's sow the seed and allow the Spirit to take over.
Well, and I think back, when I was at the Christian Student Center working there, we had a lot of folks. It's crazy how God works, but we had a lot of folks that accidentally came to the Student Center.
Yeah.
And once they found out what our organization was about, they were almost like, I don't know if I want to be a part of this. I had a lot of students say, I didn't even think I would be going to church or a Christian Student Center whatsoever. That was not my intention. But they stayed not because of the devotionals or not because of what we were posting on social media. It was because of the people they interacted with. Mm-hmm. There was one or two individuals that they met at some of these events, and they're like, yeah, I mean, I just kept coming back because it was nice to get to know them. I wanted to continue to build that relationship. And then slowly that evolves into having a Bible study, and these questions start to come up, ethical issues or doctrine questions, or what is it? Who was Jesus, and why should I care? Some of these things started kind of surfacing in those individual studies, which ultimately led to a lot of them, giving their life to Christ. I can't tell you how many people came up to me, after the fact, maybe months after they'd been there, and was just like, I just thought you hated me. Not me, but like Christians. And I thought the perception of Christians on who I was and what I've done was just, I could never belong to a Christian community. And they stuck around and became very big leaders at the Student Center later on. I mean, so that's the model, all right? Like, you have a group of individuals that their mission field was the college campus, right? And they were going out and they were meeting folks and building relationships and having reason for them to come to the Student Center and participate and meet other folks. And then, over time, these relationships continue to develop and grow, and that leads into having these deeper conversations. And then you look at the church. I don't know if we're doing that. I don't know if we're in our local communities, whether that be in your community, it might be your work, your coworkers, it might be school, it might be, peers, like parents, if you have kids and other parents, like those type of communities, or even like our local Chattanooga community. Are we going in and having things for folks to be able to participate in, meet folks, build relationships, and then we're starting to organically create some of these conversations?
Yeah, and so bringing this back into then this whole context of silent versus non-silent, and obviously you're painting a picture here of building individual relationships. I think we get ahead of ourselves when we're talking about social media, and I don't know what the average amount of friends that people have on Facebook or on TikTok or on Instagram. Let's just say it's 300, between 300 and 500. And so this desire to put things out there. Now, this is just me talking out loud. I haven't thought about this. This is just a
oh no,
yeah. It's just a thought that has popped in my brain listening to you. There's almost this. I have this tool in my pocket that I can evangelize a large group of people if I'll just throw my opinions out there and let people see, and people are going to read this and they're going to be convinced that, oh, I'm living in sin, I need to change my lifestyle. That contrasted with the picture that you just painted of just picking one person, and developing a relationship with that person and bringing that person to Christ and making a disciple of that person, who in turn does the same thing and makes another disciple, who in turn makes another disciple. And now all of a sudden, if you stretch that out 10 years down the road, your one connection with that one person could be 1,000 people that you've brought to Christ. But I think we get ahead of ourselves and we think, the easy thing to do is just put a post out there because it's going to reach 500 people, and I've done my, check that box off for doing my evangelistic duty for the week or whatever. And we never take it any further than that because we think we're actually impacting a large group of people when maybe we're not doing that at all. And it's way more effective to just decide, this year I'm going to pick one person who I know needs Christ, and I'm going to do everything I can to bring this person to Christ, to sow that seed and pray that they're going to, be convicted by the Spirit and have this remarkable thing that's been given to us called the gospel. And so that's a lot different picture than what's been put in front of us today. And so maybe as I'm processing through this, thinking out loud, the social media is way more of a distraction and a false sense of us doing our evangelistic job than what it is. And it's taking away from actually doing what we are supposed to be doing as a church. But you think about this. I hate to keep going on and on. You think about this. If every member here at Central over the next 12 months brought one person to Christ, our church, we would double in size. And then you begin to see this exponential, like compounding interest. You begin to see this exponential growth taking place if you're truly intent on making disciples who make other disciples.
Yep. And that's the model. That's why the early Christians survived so many, so much persecution and trials. And now today we still have Christianity, is because that model works, right? Yeah. They worked and had relationships with people and created disciples, and those folks, compounding interest. I mean, next thing you know, this religion is just growing at a tremendous rate. James 3 talks about taming the tongue, and when I think about social media, does it help? Does it hurt? I think there is a place for social media. I think there's a way that we can interact and post and engage on social media. Like, I know you've been doing some Bible summaries. I think things like that can be very powerful because it's very contrast to what you typically see on social media. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about, the Bible, you're talking about Jesus, who he was, positive, encouraging messages, because that, I think, is what maybe that social media environment needs, so that it can prompt the opportunity for you to engage with these individuals, because they're not going to be like, oh yeah, Craig's that guy that just posts all those crazy, I'm doing everything wrong posts. No, Craig's that guy that's he's been posting a lot about who Jesus is and why he's a Christian, and that makes me curious. Maybe I want to have a conversation with him. So I think we have to really think, thinking through taming the tongue and how powerful that tool is. Social media, it's still, your words are very impactful, and how you approach things are very impactful.
Yeah. Along those lines, though, to just kind of contrast this again, we need to recognize when silence does become compromise. So I know this is like we're hitting this tennis ball back and forth. There's moments when silence is not love. Examples such as when cultural lies distort God's design, when children are being confused or harmed, when sin is normalized within the church. And I put here, that reminds me of Ezekiel chapter 33. The Watchman, if you're listening, go read that. You see some great instruction there. We don't have time to get into that. But warning people does matter. But warnings must reflect God's heart and not our personal outrage. And I think that this is where most people are missing it completely. They're either beating people up with the truth or scared completely into silence, and both things are wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We should not stay silent, because that can be very dangerous, right? I mean, that if we stayed silent, then the word doesn't get carried, the gospel doesn't make and prevail in our culture. And I think that it is important if there are things that are a direct threat to our mission as Christians and the gospel, or distorting that in any way, I think there's definitely a medium for us to talk about these things. I think my difference is, and maybe not, maybe we're on the same page, but I think my biggest difference is what is the medium that we do that? I strongly think it's not on a social media platform of any sort. I personally feel that we need to do a better job as Christians, and I'm thinking about Central, and I think Central does a really good job at this, but I think that we could definitely do more in this space of getting into our communities. We have, the Chattanooga Food Bank and Community Kitchen and other organizations that are in Chattanooga that are, making a difference in this community.
Right.
And how cool would it be for them to know, oh, that's Central. Like they help out. And there's an example. So, my wife teaches at a school here in Chattanooga, inner city school, lower income, and she loves it. And one of their main community partners at the school is a church in Chattanooga. And she was telling me about this new program that they just started. So the past couple years, they've done Adopt a Student. They buy Christmas gifts for these kids. Everything on their list. They show up with a U-Haul truck, and it's full of Christmas gifts right before they leave on Christmas break. Just giving some encouragement. They have a Bible club after school that's completely optional and is allowed, but it's still an opportunity for students to participate in a Bible activity after hours.
Right.
And then now they're starting a Adopt a Teacher program. And so they sent a form to all the teachers at that school, and there was 7 or 8 things that you could participate in. It might be weekly encouragement via email. It might be a gift cards. It might be devotionals. And there's other things too. And so that church is doing a really good job of identifying, hey, this school is in our local community, and we can really make a big difference here. So they focus their efforts on encouraging the teachers, sharing love, sharing Jesus with in a public school.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, is a good example of a church that's identified a community and have made efforts to reach that community. And they're not just going there and preaching, right? They're just being good people and loving. And you have to know that that's going to have some impact on souls at that church. At that school.
Yeah. I love it. Great stuff. So, thinking about the practical application of this as we've unpacked these things, there's 5 things here that I think are worth noting before we speak, wherever that speaking takes place, if it's on social media, if it's to a person, if it's, in front of a group of people. Number 1, is this person inside the church or outside? That matters because we see Jesus speaking very differently to people. You pointed out the religious leaders got rebuked because they should have known better, and so he was rebuking, he was correcting them. Versus people that were outside the church, you see him being more tender and more patient, and because they didn't know, and so that's a completely different scenario there that I think is important. Do I have relational equity with this person or not? That determines, should you even be speaking to the person? Are you the right person to be speaking to the person? Am I reacting emotionally or speaking prayerfully? This is a huge one. Like if you're triggered and then your immediate response is to go type something out on Instagram or Facebook or whatever your social media platform is, you probably ought to back off from that. It's like making a major purchase. We've talked about this before. Like, don't make any major purchases within 6 months of a huge life event, right? Or, if you're going to make a major purchase, probably like go home and sleep on it and then see if you still have to have that item the next day. So same rule applies to our social media habits. Is my tone restorative, or is it breaking people down? Is it tearing people down? And then number 5, is this the right platform for this message? And that takes a lot of, I think, self-control and maturity and wisdom to think about that. All 5 of these things are things that I need to apply in my own practice here. I think I'm doing a better job at that, honestly.
You are.
Thank you.
You are.
Good positive affirmation there.
You definitely are.
All right, so that wraps up this episode. I think this was a good conversation, Brandon. I hope that we as partners in this can continue to dialogue and work through. I still have issues with it. I still struggle on how silent is too silent. And I think everybody listening may have those same issues.
Yep.
Thoughts, final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. And it's something I've fallen victim to. Like it's easier to stay silent. It requires less work. And that I think that is Satan. It's Satan having control of us. And I'm not saying like silent on just social media. I'm just saying silent in general.
Yeah.
Like me being a good person and pleasant and my actions alone are not enough. It's important for people to know what drives me, what makes me tick, and why do I do these things. It's because
Right.
Christ is my Savior, and He's given us an incredible gift of grace, and we need to be sharing that with the people that are around us. So,
good thoughts. Well, listen, folks, if you've liked this podcast, share it, like it. We are on all the different platforms. We've got a YouTube that you can watch the episodes here in this really awesome studio. Shout out to our sponsor, Ministry League. You can see their logo app thing there on the screen. If you're watching this on YouTube, consider downloading it. It's a great resource for Christians to have, whether you're just a churchgoer, a member, or if you're in a place of leadership, whatever. It's got a lot of applicable items there. Also, shout out to our podcast out of the studio on Sundays, Digging Deeper. After Sundays, Digging Deeper, it's a great podcast that wraps up the weekly lessons from the pulpit. Until our next episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, be kind to one another, love one another, and remember the Creator of the universe loves you so much.
He gave His only Son for you.
Good, you remembered. Have a blessed day, everybody.